Hello, and welcome to the Artisanal Writer. We are an online journal about the craft and practice of writing, and we explore what makes great writing and how great writing happens, and how writers who love to read make great writing happen. And I have one with me today, Marta Balcewicz, and we're going to take a look at her debut novel, Big Shadow. I had to look because I actually have lent my copy out. I read it in a day and then I gave it away. And I realized this morning, I gotta print this out so that people can know what to look for. And it's just the most beautiful, honestly, it's the best picture. Love, love, love the graphic. Marta's book is a really fantastic read. I read it in a day, as I just I told her. It's a coming of age story about Judy, who's a small town girl of about 17. And she lives in a small town, and during a rainstorm goes to the university that's anchored to her town, and meets Maurice, who's a poet, who's around 30 years her senior. And they have honestly like a thunderclap moment, and he invites her to audit his class. And it is an absolutely fantastic first novel. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And Judy, like a lot of small town girls, is looking for someone to usher, or a moment that will usher her out of that place that she's at. And Maurice sort of provides the bridge to that. But it is a wild ride that I absolutely, and I have to tell people to get their hands on this book, because it is just fantastic, and it explores what it's like to be an adolescent at a certain time in life. It explores, it's sort of a cautionary tale in a lot of ways. I don't want to give too much away, but I really and truly love this book, and I'm really excited to have Marta read a portion of it, and then we'll ask her a few questions. Yeah, so without further ado, this is Marta.
Great. Thanks, Laura.
My pleasure.
So I chose a scene that, just to give some context, Judy, the narrator, and this person, this older man she befriends, at one point he suggests that they make a movie together, and so they go to a friend's place in New York and borrow a camcorder to make films. This is set in 1998, so it's a kind of Panasonic, camcorder of that era. And this scene starts at the moment when they leave that apartment with the camcorder, and they're just walking down the street, and Judy's holding the camcorder. So Maurice says to her, "Wait, is there tape inside? Is it charged?" he asked, stopping suddenly in the middle of the sidewalk. I looked at the camcorder. I'd been cradling it in my arms since Dana's. I pressed the power button. A green light came on. "I think so," I said. "Great," Maurice said. "I'm going to run in and get a coffee." He pointed at a store whose windows were covered in candy advertisements. A sign made with markers and cardboard said "Snacks" and "Keys cut inside." "You film," he shouted. He took a step toward the store and turned around, his hair in his face. He was excited. He looked nervous, too, like an actor who'd been called in for his big audition out of the total blue. "Can you get an angle from the entrance looking in? Or whatever you think works best, actually. You're the director here. Just get me buying a coffee. Just me being me." Maurice waved his hands in the air as he said the last part, then bolted into the shop. For 30 seconds, I stood unmoving. the camcorder still in my arms. I looked around at the cars, the people, and the buildings that knew nothing about Maurice and me, about where I'd come from, and what I'd been doing since the rainstorm hit my city 2 weeks before. For the first time, I felt something that I'd only ever felt in the company of my mother. An embarrassment so deep, it shamed me to feel it, even in secret. I felt it in my chest and in my guts. I wanted to set the camera on the sidewalk and run. I looked down at it, at its mocking green light. I wished the battery would die suddenly. I felt burdened by this machine, the way it implied a whole job for me to execute, not on my terms. Okay, I said, lifting the camera to my face. Here I come. I walked into the store with the viewfinder pressed to my eye. There was an old man sitting behind the counter. He had deep creases around his mouth and a tiny electric fan directed at his head. As I crab walked the length of the store, he followed me with his gaze, but said nothing. He didn't ask me to go away. I wedged myself into a corner of the shop, next to a tower of flattened cardboard. I filmed as Maurice sauntered toward the counter. He looked casual. I hopped forward to get the old man in the shot too. Then I took a few steps back. I panned from the old man to the back of Maurice's head, doing an extreme zoom on his hair, so that all I saw for a second was a wobbly, dark field. Then I zoomed out and panned back to the old man. For some reason, the old man never looked into the camera lens. It was like he'd been trained in this, out in Hollywood. I'll have a small coffee, Maurice said, sounding oddly stilted. The old man set a styrofoam cup next to an ordinary Black & Decker coffee maker. It was the same kind of my mother used in our kitchen. He poured coffee from the drip pot into the cup and handed it to Maurice. It's not very hot. You want it hotter? The man asked. At the same time, Maurice tossed 2 singles on the counter. Huh? He said. Not hot, the man raised his voice. I don't have it hot because it's pretty hot out. When he finished, he stared directly into the lens, looking unhappy. The camera kept rolling. In the foreground, Maurice turned around and walked past me, without looking at me, and out the door.
Oh, wow. You have the best reading voice, Marta.
Thanks.
Wow, you really do. It's so interesting, the beginning of this book, when I thought it was going to be something very different, because you'd set it up with Judy with her cousins. And then when it switched to Maurice when she goes to the university, and I thought, oh, I'm so interested in this like student teacher dynamic. And it is a real compelling draw for a lot of readers. So I wanted, like, there's just a lot to drill down on psychologically speaking. So I wanted to really know what drew you to that dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one, like you said, student teacher, or one can call it like mentor mentee,
Yeah.
or role model and role modelee, or a big part of it too is like artist and fan of that artist. And they're all kind of similar in that they all they're common. It's almost some kind of human nature to end up falling into these types of dynamics. And also what makes them extra interesting, I think, is that what's also common is that they end up resulting in a power dynamic where so often, interestingly, people take advantage of the person in power, and in that power dynamic ends up taking advantage somehow, it's to some degree, varying degrees, of the person with less power in that dynamic. So
Exactly.
um yeah, it's this interesting thing we do, so many of us, and yeah, it's all these things that it's like, why are humans like this? Why are we kind of shitty, when the opportunity presents itself, um,
Right.
to
And
take
why is that for
advantage?
some people, that's their first fallback position? That's what I found fascinating about this book, right? Like
Yeah,
to see
yeah.
how, that dynamic, you see it happening, like a cloud forming, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think, yes, I think we like seeing how people are kind of flawed and or bad, Um, and I don't know, it's interesting because it can happen to us, or maybe we've done it to someone, or um, yeah, it's interesting how
Yeah.
we're kind of shitty as humans.
Yeah, and you're like worried as a reader, like, gosh, where do I fall on the spectrum? Like it's neat that, and I found that you did that without judgment, which anyway, yeah, anyway, it was a great dynamic to really mine, I thought. One of your Maurice, the main character, comes out of a very specific time in the New York art scene. So talk to me a little about the research that you did about this time, and have you ever always sort of been interested in it?
Yeah, Maurice is so he used to be he was in a band in the mid 70s in New York. And then, like a lot of people who played music, then he also wrote poetry, and that's the thing that he's kind of continued doing, writing, and he's written like a novel or two and a memoir. And yeah, I've always been interested in that movement and those musicians and writers. So I didn't really have to do any research, which was nice. And temporally speaking, it fits nicely into him, if he's part of that scene. So he's kind of in his mid 20s and the mid 70s. Come 1998, which is the setting for the novel, he's nearing 50. So he's at that point where, yeah, at least, speaking in cliches, it's kind of like a midlife crisis point, right?
Exactly.
So he's starting to sort of yearn for attention, and a feeling of youthfulness and connection to youth culture in this, somewhat pathetic way. And yeah, and the punk scene more specifically, as a choice for something out of which he came out of. It's such a like it's such a kind of youth culture oriented scene because it's so irreverent and countercultural and cool, right? It's just like
Yes.
about like kind of like sticking it to the man. So yeah, so he's someone who's able to remain in a kind of arrested development, because he came from this moment where it's cool to be like kind of act like a rowdy teenager, right?
Yeah.
Except now he's, much older,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yes. I always felt like right from the start, like Judy was clearly like so much more mature than he was on a bunch in so many ways.
Yeah.
You're like, why is she drawn to this dude? I don't know. Now, do you yourself have any mentors? Like, did you have any uh did you draw on that relationship when you were writing the book?
No one's specific, no one that's kind of, stands out in memory or was formative in that way. Um, but I think, I think just being a fan of music and artists, you kind of end up treating them like, when you're younger, when you're a teen or a younger adult, that obsessiveness with musicians and um it's usually musicians when you're kind of
Yeah.
like most passionately obsessed with. Yeah, they're kind of like a mentor in a sense. You kind of want to be like them, and you admire the fact that they're doing their art and they're not probably what your parents are.
Right.
Something kind of more honest, or in your eyes cool at that time. So yeah, I was a fan of music, and still am, and artists, and I think that's what I kind of made Judy be too. I think she admires Maurice, because he's an artist, and she doesn't really have a parental figure in her life who appreciates her own artistic inclinations or her creativity. And he's kind of like, I mean, if he were her dad, and she doesn't have a father, he'd be like the coolest dad in theory,
Right.
um, for her. Yeah.
So
Minus the shitty stuff, obviously.
I just read this really great memoir by Alex O'Dare, and it was her mom was Viva Superstar, who was one of Andy Warhol's, and she grew up in the Chelsea Hotel. And it was so interesting because I read your book right after I read hers, and it sort of felt like it lived in that world. So like I feel like my whole brain has been that world for the last 2 or 3 weeks, but it was a really interesting, like fascinating time. This, that time in the 70s in New York, like with the burgeoning punk scene. And yeah, I can see how you would be drawn to it for sure. What is sort of drawing you to your writing now? Like, is there something that's bubbling to the surface?
So just what I'm working on now. Um, I'm working on a novel. It's um I guess the themes that are kind of at the top of my sort of obsession list are just kind of ostracized members of society, and how they kind of find a community for themselves.
Oh, how
Um,
interesting.
so I'm working on something with a protagonist who feels very much like she doesn't belong, and ends up seeking a community that's very kind of odd, which I think has some parallels to Big Shadow, in that, I mean, Judy feels so isolated and lonely, and her
Yes.
friends are also isolated and lonely enough to have come up with a weird Big Shadow culty belief in a coming cloud, which is the cloud on the cover
Yes, that
of the
beautiful
book.
pinky cloud.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like also Judy, like I said, is so smart. Like I don't know why, I just totally identify, like she was just a smart person, but like she's clearly drawn towards, because she has this very weird fractured family life, like drawn towards male figures. So, it was interesting to sort of watch that develop too, right? I'm
Yeah.
wondering, probably it'll bleed into, who knows, like unless this other character that you're working on now is very different, like there's just so much you can work with a character like that. And what are you
Yeah.
reading? What sort of stuff are you drawn to right now? After you write a book, are you just like, okay, I just want to read something, you know, I don't even know, like fluffy, or do you just want to drill down on something else?
No, I mean, I have a huge reading list, and of course, that I have to actually think about what I'm reading. I'm forgetting what's on that big list.
I'm thinking, where's
Um,
my pile beside my bed?
yeah, I'm in the middle of Rachel Cusk's Second Place. I love Rachel Cusk.
Oh, wow.
I bought so many books lately. I'm kind of overwhelmed by the number of books I want to sink my teeth into. But yeah, Second Place is what I'm currently reading.
Awesome. And obviously when you're in the process of working on something else, do you find that you're drawn towards things that are like that?
I do, but I'm also so like leery of this phenomenon where you end up kind of trying to sound like what you're writing.
Oh
So
gosh, it's true.
I took a workshop with someone who said, a writer whose work I really love, and she said she just completely stays away from contemporary literature when writing her book. It's all classics. It's all like older works, just so that kind of more contemporary style of writing doesn't taint her, um her own writing as she's drafting. And yeah, that's I could
Yeah, it's a peril when you're writing
understand.
that you're going to subsume the voice of the writers that you're reading at the time. I get it. Like it can be sometimes a little bit like you're drawn towards it and you're doing it almost on a subconscious level sometimes.
Oh, totally. Yeah, and you suddenly see yourself writing this thing, and you're like, oh gosh, that kind of sounds like what I was reading last week. If you happen to really love what you read and admired it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Well, I just love the book
Thank
and
you.
I hope it gets into tons more hands. It's published by Book Hug, correct? Book
Yes.
Hug Press. And will you be going to do any readings that we should know about, Marta?
I just did a few, so right now I don't have any more. Maybe more will pop up.
Well, excellent. Well, hopefully we'll get to see you again. I wish you the very, very best of luck
Thank you,
crafting
Laura.
this next one. And I'm again, I urge people to pick it up. You got to see that you cannot miss this gorgeous cover. I'm going to show it to people again. Look at that gorgeous cloud. Thank you so much, Marta, for
Thank you,
joining us.
Laura.
And
Thank you.
again, the best of luck with this. Well
Thanks
done.
so much.
Okay, thanks for finding the time for me.
Thank you.
Okay, bye now.
Bye.